The man at the back door looked as though the winter had already half killed him, and Prudence Merrow gave him her supper without stopping to think about it, which was the first mistake of her life, and the best one she ever made. It was a bitter January night at the Hart and Hind, the coaching inn on the Winterborn road where Prudence worked from dark to dark for her keep, and a straw pallet in the scullery, and she had come out to the yard to throw the peelings to the pig when she found him. A big man in a ragged coat with no shape left to it, his boots split, his face gray with cold and hunger, leaning against the woodpile as though it were the only thing holding him up. A vagrant, a beggar, the kind of man the innkeeper, Mr. Call, drove off with the yard broom and a curse, because a respectable house could not have such creatures cluttering the doorstep, frightening the paying custom. Prudence Merrow knew all that. She also knew what it was to be hungry, knew it in her bones, having been an orphan of the parish before Mr. Call took her on for the price of her labor. And she looked at the gray-faced stranger, swaying against the woodpile, and she did not see a vagrant. She saw a person who was cold and starving, which was a thing she understood from the inside, and she did the only thing that made any sense to her, which was to help. "Wait there," she said. "Don't let Mr. Call see you. Wait." She went back into the scullery, and she took her own supper. The heel of a brown loaf and a wedge of hard cheese and a wrinkled winter apple, the whole of what she would eat that day. And she wrapped it in her apron and carried it out to him, and she pressed it into his cold hands. "It isn't much," she said. "It's what I have. There's a good barn 2 fields east, with hay you can burrow in, and the farmer's deaf and won't trouble you till spring. Eat first. You'll not make it to the barn the state you're in, without something in you." She hesitated, then unwound the thin shawl from her own shoulders. It was little enough, but it was wool, and it was more than his ragged coat, and she put it round his neck. "Take that too. Go on, before he comes out." The stranger looked at the bread in his hands, and then at her, and something moved in his gray, exhausted face that she could not read. "This is your supper," he said. His voice was rougher and deeper than she expected, and, though she was too cold and too hurried to mark it then, it did not have the sound of a vagrant's voice at all. "You are giving me your own supper. You do not know me. I could be anyone, a thief, worse." "You could be," Prudence agreed, "but you're hungry now, and that's what's in front of me, and I'll not stand here and watch a man starve on a night like this, because he might be wicked. Everybody might be wicked. You have to feed the ones in front of you anyway, or you'd never feed anyone at all." She glanced at the lit windows of the inn. "I have to go back before I'm missed. Eat, keep the shawl, and God keep you, whoever you are. It's a hard night to be out in the world alone." And Prudence Merrow went back inside to her cold scullery and her empty stomach and her long night's work, and thought no more about it, because kindness to her was not an event to be remembered, but simply the water she swam in, the only wealth she had ever had to give, and she gave it the way other people breathe. She did not see the stranger stand a little straighter as she went. She did not see him look after her for a long moment with an expression that had nothing of the beggar in it at all. She did not know, could not have dreamed, that she had just given her last piece of bread to Alaric Vane, 6th Duke of Winterborn, the greatest and most feared landholder in the whole of the north, on whose 10,000 acres the Hart and Hind itself stood, and who was at that moment 3 days into a private, furious, secret experiment that was about to change both their lives forever. The Duke of Winterborn had not meant to be a beggar. He had meant to be a stranger, which is a different thing, and turned out to be a much more difficult one. He was a hard man, and he knew it, and until that January, he had believed it a virtue. His father had taught him that a great landholder who let himself be loved was a landholder who would be robbed, and Alaric had learned the lesson thoroughly. He ran Winterborn like a machine, through stewards and agents and ledgers, and he had never in his life walked his own villages as anything but the Duke, mounted, distant, feared. He knew his land to the last acre, and his tenants not at all, and it had suited him until the business of Simon Fell. Simon Fell was a tenant farmer on the Winterborn estate, whom the Duke's head steward, a smooth, hard man named Garrick, had turned off his farm that autumn for arrears of rent. It was all in order. The ledgers were clear. Alaric had signed the paper without a second thought. And then, in December, he had learned, by the merest accident, a word overheard, that Simon Fell had not been in arrears at all, that Garrick had been quietly bleeding the poorer tenants for years, pocketing the difference, falsifying the accounts, and turning off any man who complained, and that the Duke of Winterborn, distant and feared, and utterly ignorant of his own people, had signed his name to a dozen small cruelties, without ever once suspecting, because he had never troubled to know the men whose lives he held in his hand. It had shaken him more than he would have admitted. Not guilt, exactly. He was not much practiced in guilt, but a cold, furious understanding that he had been made a fool and a tyrant by his own remoteness, that his fearsome reputation had built a wall so high that the truth of his own estate could not reach him over it. And so the Duke of Winterborn had done a mad thing, an impulsive thing, the first genuinely impulsive thing of his controlled and armored life. He had put on the oldest, worst clothes he could find, and he had told no one, and he had gone out onto his own land on foot, as a nobody, a ragged stranger, to see with his own eyes what his people were, and how they lived and what was done in his name, when the Duke was not thought to be watching. He had learned a great deal in 3 days, and most of it had shamed him. He had learned that his tenants feared the name of Winterborn the way one fears the weather, as a vast, cold, indifferent power that might ruin you on a whim and could not be appealed to. He had learned that Garrick's petty tyrannies were common knowledge to everyone on the estate except the Duke himself. He had learned that a man in rags is invisible, is spoken past, is moved along, is offered nothing, that the world he had ruled his whole life looked entirely different from the bottom of it, and that he had never once bothered to look. And on the third bitter night, cold and hungry, and further from his own comfort than he had ever been, the Duke of Winterborn had come to the back door of the Hart and Hind at the end of his strength, and a scullery girl with nothing to her name had given him her own supper and the shawl off her own shoulders, and told him God keep him, whoever he was. It undid something in him that his father's teaching had held shut for 35 years. He ate the bread in the freezing barn 2 fields east, burrowed in the deaf farmer's hay with a scullery maid's thin shawl around his neck, and he could not stop thinking about her. Not because she was beautiful, he had barely seen her face in the dark, but because of the things she had said, so plainly, as though it were the most obvious truth in the world. You have to feed the ones in front of you anyway, or you'd never feed anyone at all. He had spent his whole life doing precisely the opposite. He had let the possibility that a person might be unworthy, a thief, a fraud, a Garrick, justify his giving nothing to anyone, trusting no one, walling everyone out, and a penniless orphan who owned literally nothing but a heel of bread and a wool shawl had looked at the same cold calculus and come to the opposite conclusion, and given away the whole of what she had, to a stranger, on the worst night of the year. She was richer than he was. That was the thought that would not leave him, lying in the hay in his ragged coat, the 6th Duke of Winterborn with 10,000 acres. A scullery maid with nothing had more to give than he did, and gave it more freely, and the difference was not in their purses, but in their hearts. And his had been kept locked so long he had forgotten it could be opened at all. He did not go home the next day. He stayed. He told himself it was to finish his investigation of Garrick, and he did finish it, methodically, gathering what he needed to destroy the man. But that was not the whole of why he stayed, and he knew it, and the knowing was a strange, warm, frightening thing he had no experience of managing. He stayed because there was a scullery maid at the Hart and Hind who had given him her supper, and he found that he wanted, more than he had wanted anything in years, to know her, to know what kind of person gives away her last bread and thinks nothing of it, before he put off the rags and became the Duke again, and lost, forever, the chance to be known by her as a man rather than feared by her as a master. So Alaric Vane, Duke of Winterborn, took a laborer's work at the Hart and Hind under a false name, mucking the stables for a corner to sleep in and 2 meals a day, and set about the most important task of his life, which was to earn the good opinion of a girl who owned nothing and did not know she was speaking to the most powerful man in the North. His name, he told them, was Alan Ward. He was a discharged soldier, he said, tramping north to look for work, which explained the accent that did not quite match the rags. Mr. Call, who needed a strong back in the stables and did not care to pay much for it, took him on with a grunt, and Alan Ward became a fixture of the inn-yard, and Prudence Merrow, to her great surprise, acquired a friend. For that was the thing that astonished her about the big, quiet stableman. He noticed her. In 7 years at the Hart and Hind, Prudence had been many things. A pair of hands, a scullery drudge, an orphan taken on out of grudging charity, and reminded of it daily. But she had never been noticed, not as a person, not by anyone, and Alan Ward noticed her. He noticed when she was carrying too heavy a load, and took the other end of it without being asked. He noticed that she was given the worst of the food and the coldest place to sleep, and worked longer hours than anyone, and something went hard in his face when he noticed it, though she could not think why a stableman should care. He noticed what she said, actually listened, turned her small observations over, asked her questions as though her answers were worth having, and no one had ever done that in the whole of Prudence Merrow's life. And she found herself, over the gray weeks of that January, blooming under his attention like a plant that had been kept in a cupboard and set at last in a window. They talked in stolen moments, over the washing up, in the yard at dusk, in the brief warm interval after the coaches had gone, and before Mr. Call found them more to do. She told him things she had never told anyone, about the parish orphanage, about the cold, about the small, dogged private philosophy she had built to survive a loveless life, which came down, in the end, to the bread and the shawl, that the only thing that had ever made her feel rich, feel real, feel like a person of worth, rather than a piece of unwanted furniture, was the giving of what little she had to someone who needed it more. "It's the one thing they can't take from me," she told him once, quietly, scrubbing a pot. "They can take my wages, and my sleep, and my name. Mr. Call calls me girl, mostly, or you, but they can't stop me being kind. That's mine. That's the one thing that's mine. And a person has to have one thing that's theirs, Alan, or they stop being a person at all. Kindness is mine. It's all I've got, but it's a great deal. When you think about it, it's more than Mr. Call has, for all his money. I'd not trade with him. I'd rather have nothing and be kind than have everything and be him." And Alan Ward, Alaric Vane, Duke of Winterborn, who had lived his whole life as a colder and richer Mr. Call, looked at the scullery maid scrubbing her pot, and understood that he was falling in love with her, completely and irrevocably, and that it was the most dangerous thing he had ever done, and that he did not care, and that the only question left was how in God's name he was ever going to tell her the truth. There was one evening he came very near to telling her, and did not, and the not doing haunted him afterward as the last easy happiness before everything broke. It was a Sunday, the one half-day Mr. Call grudgingly allowed, and a rare mild dusk had come after weeks of iron cold, and the Duke had found Prudence sitting on the mounting block in the empty yard, with her face turned up to the last of the light, resting, which he had almost never seen her do. He sat down beside her, and for a while neither of them spoke, and it was the most peaceful he had felt in his whole armored life. A scullery maid and a disguised Duke on a mounting block, watching the sky go from gray to rose, asking nothing of each other at all. "You never say where you're going," she said at last. "After, when the spring comes and you move on, you never say where. Every other tramping man who's come through here has had a somewhere he was headed, real or dreamed. You don't. You talk like a man with no direction at all, Alan, and yet you don't talk like a lost man. It's the strangest thing about you. Where do you belong, truly, if you could be anywhere?" And Alaric Vane, Duke of Winterborn, sat on the mounting block with the truth rising in his throat. "I belong 3 miles from here in a house with 100 rooms. I own the ground under this inn, and the sky over your head. Come with me, and I will put you in silk and never let you be cold again." And he looked at her tired, peaceful face turned up to the rose-colored sky, and he could not say it, because he knew, with a certainty that frightened him, that the moment he said it this exact and perfect peace, 2 equals on a mounting block with nothing between them, would end and never come again. "Here," he said instead, which was not the whole truth, but was, he realized as he said it, Not a lie either. I belong here, on this block, in this yard, with you. I have not belonged anywhere in my life the way I belong on this mounting block at this moment. Prudence Merrow, and I would not trade it for any house in England. He watched the color rise in her cheek and hated himself, and meant every word. Ask me again in the spring where I'm going. I'll have an answer by then. I promise you I will. And I hope, you may not dislike it. That's no answer at all, she said. But she was smiling, and she did not move away. And they sat on together while the light died, closer than they had ever sat. And the Duke of Winterborn made himself a promise in the dusk, that when he told her, and he would tell her, before the spring, he would find the courage. He would tell her gently, and privately, and in his own words, so that she heard it first and best from him, and understood before anything else that the man on the mounting block had been real. It was the one promise of that whole tender season he failed to keep, for the choice was taken from him by Garrick's arrival before he ever found the courage, and Prudence heard the truth not gently and privately from the man who loved her, but flung across a public yard in a steward's astonished bow. And the failing of that promise was the thing Alaric Vane regretted most bitterly of all, and spent the rest of his life making up to her, one kept promise at a time. Because there was the trap he had built for himself, and he saw it closing even as he fell. He had come to her in rags, as Alan Ward the stableman, and she had given her heart. He could see it now, in the way she lit when he came into the yard. To Alan Ward, a poor man, an equal, a fellow scraper in the cold. And he was not Alan Ward. He was the Duke of Winterborn, whose very name she feared, whose steward had ground her own kind under his heel, who owned the ground she stood on and the roof she slept under, and could buy the whole heart and hind with the loose coin in a drawer he never opened. When he told her the truth, and he must tell her, he could not build a life on a lie. Everything would change. She would look at him and see not Alan but the Duke, and the easy equal warmth between them would freeze, because you cannot be easy with a man you have been taught since birth to fear, and he would lose the very thing he had come in rags to find, to be known and liked and perhaps loved for himself and not for the terrible weight of his name. He put it off. He knew he was putting it off, and he despised himself for it, and he put it off anyway, because every day as Alan Ward was a day of a kind of happiness he had never known and was terrified to end. But a secret that large cannot be kept forever, and the reckoning, when it came from the last direction he expected. For the Duke of Winterborn had forgotten, in his 3 weeks of stolen happiness, that a duke who vanishes for a month is a duke who will be looked for. It was Garrick who found him. The steward had been searching for his master for a fortnight, quietly, with mounting panic, because a missing duke is a catastrophe for the man responsible for his affairs, and because Garrick, whose thefts had made him watchful, had begun to fear that the duke's disappearance was not unconnected to certain inquiries he had lately heard were being made about the estate accounts. He had traced a description of a large, well-spoken stranger tramping the Winterborn villages. He had followed it to the Hart and Hind, and on a gray afternoon in February, he rode into the inn yard with 2 grooms at his back, and drew rein in front of the ragged stableman forking dung, and his hard, smooth face went first white, and then a mottled, furious red, as he recognized, under the dirt and the beard, the master he had been robbing for 6 years. "Your Grace," Garrick said, and swung down and bowed, and every soul in the inn yard turned to stare. The word fell into the yard like a stone into a still pond. "Your Grace," Prudence Merrow, coming out of the scullery with a basket of wet linen on her hip, stopped dead. She looked at Garrick bowing. She looked at the 2 grooms pulling off their hats. And she looked at Alan Ward, her Alan, the poor discharged soldier who mucked the stables and took the heavy end of her loads, and listened to her as though she mattered, standing with the dung fork in his hands, and an expression on his face that she had never seen there before, and that told her, before he said a single word, that the impossible thing was true. "Alan," she said. Her voice came out very small. "Alan, he called you. Why did he call you?" Mr. Call had come running, wiping his hands, bowing and scraping and stammering. Your Grace, we had no notion. We'd never have set you to the stables. Oh, the honor, the terrible mistake. And the whole yard was dissolving into the frantic, obsequious chaos that the presence of a duke creates. And through the middle of it, Prudence Marrow stood entirely still with her basket of linen and looked at the man she loved and waited for him to tell her it was not true. He could not tell her that. Prudence, the Duke of Winterborn said. He set down the fork. He came toward her, and she watched the yard fall back from him, watched grown men she had feared step aside and lower their eyes, and she understood with a lurch of pure vertigo exactly what she was seeing, that the power in this yard, the terrible cold power that ran the whole of the North Country, lived in the ragged stableman walking toward her, with his hands open and his face full of dread. Prudence, my name is not Alan Ward. I have to tell you the truth now, all of it, in front of everyone, because you above all people must not hear it as gossip afterward. My name is Alaric Vane. I am the Duke of Winterborn. She did not faint. She did not weep. She did the thing that was worst of all, that he would remember for the rest of his life. She went very quiet and very still, and she took one step back from him, away, and she said, in a voice scraped hollow, "The Duke of Winterborn." Yes. "The Duke of Winterborn," she said again, as though trying to make the words fit into a world that had, a moment ago, made sense. Whose steward turned Simon Fell off his farm and let his children go hungry? Whose name? Do you know what your name is, to us? Do you know what it means, at the bottom, where I live? It's the cold. It's the thing that can ruin you and never even know your face. It's the power that doesn't care. That's your name, to me. That's what I was taught your name meant before I could read. Her eyes were huge and dark in her white face. And you came to my back door in rags and let me give you my supper and my shawl. And you let me tell you things I never told a living soul, about the orphanage and the cold, and I told you kindness was the one thing that was mine, the one thing they couldn't take, and I gave it to you. I gave you the realest part of me, and the whole time you were him. You were the coldest, richest man in the North, playing at being poor, letting a scullery maid feed you and pity you, and her voice broke, finally, terribly. Was it a game? Was I a game? Did you come to see how the poor girl would amuse you? Give her a false name and watch her fall in love with a stableman and laugh. Afterward, in your great house, at the little fool who gave the Duke of Winterborn her last piece of bread? No, Alaric said. No. Prudence. No. God, no. Never that. Let me... Don't. She stepped back again, and now the tears were falling, but her voice had gone hard, the hardness of a person protecting the last of herself from a final blow. Don't be kind to me now. That's the cruelest thing you could do, and you've done enough. You had every advantage a person can have, Your Grace. Every acre, every pound, every power, and you used it to come down here and take the one thing I had. My kindness was mine. It was all I had, and it was mine, and I gave it to Alan Ward. And Alan Ward doesn't exist. You invented him. So I gave it to no one. I gave it to a lie you wore like a coat. And now you'll put the lie off, and go back up to your castle, and I'll go back to my scullery. Except now I won't even have the one thing, because you've shown me it can be taken after all. A rich man can just come down and take it, wearing rags, and I'll never be able to give it again without wondering who's really underneath. She set down the basket of linen, very carefully, the way a person does when they are holding themselves together by the smallest margin. I hope it was worth it, Your Grace. Whatever you came down here to find, I hope you found it. Now please, please, let me go back to work. It's all I've got left, and you've spoiled even that, but it's still all I've got. And Prudence Marrow turned, in front of the whole silent staring yard, and walked back into the scullery, and shut the door, and left the Duke of Winterborn standing in the mud, in his ragged coat, with the terrible understanding that he had, in trying to find the one true thing in his life, very nearly destroyed it, that he had taken a girl whose only wealth was her open heart, and taught her, at last, to close it, and that the closing was his doing, and that no amount of the power she feared could force it back open, because the one thing a duke cannot command is to be trusted by someone he has lied to. He did not force it. That was the beginning of the only thing he did right in the whole affair. He did not go to the scullery door and use his rank or his passion to batter down her refusal. He had taken enough from her by force of deception. He would take nothing more by force of anything. Instead, he did two things. The first, he did that same afternoon, in the inn-yard, in front of everyone, because Prudence had said the truth would be gossip, and he was determined it would be justice instead. He turned to Garrick, who had been standing through the whole terrible scene with the growing understanding of a guilty man watching his world end. And the Duke of Winterborn became, in an instant, the cold and terrible thing his name had always promised. Only now, it was pointed where it belonged. "You," he said, "are going to be shown exactly why I spent 3 weeks in rags on my own land, Garrick. I did not do it for amusement. I did it because I learned what you have been doing to my people. The false accounts, the skimmed rents, the tenants turned off on your lies while you pocketed the difference, and let the Duke of Winterborn's name take the blame for your theft. I have the proof. I gathered it myself, on foot, in these rags, talking to the men you robbed, who could not talk to me because you had built a wall between me and my own land, and grown fat in the gap. Simon Fell will have his farm back, and his losses paid tenfold. Every tenant you cheated will be found and made whole. And you will be prosecuted to the full weight of the law, and I will spend whatever it costs to see you in a cell, because you did not only rob me, you made my name a terror to people who should have been able to look to me for protection. And that, Garrick, is the one thing I find I cannot forgive." He gestured to the grooms. "Take him. He does not set foot on Winterborn land again, except in the custody of the magistrate." It was done as he said. Garrick was taken. The proof was ironclad, and word ran across the whole estate by nightfall that the Duke of Winterborn had gone secretly among his people in rags to catch the steward who had been robbing them, and had set it all to rights, and meant to make restitution to every wronged family. And the name of Winterborn, which had meant cold, indifferent power for 3 generations, began, that very night, in 100 cottages, to mean something it had never meant before. That the master had come down, and looked, and cared, and acted. It was the beginning of a change that would remake the whole estate, and it had grown, though few of them knew it, from a heel of bread given at a back door. But the second thing the Duke did was harder, and slower, and mattered more, and it could not be done with power at all. He did not leave the hart and hind. He put off the rags, there was no more use in them, and he sent for decent clothes, and he took the best rooms the inn had, and he stayed. And every day he went about the business of setting the estate to rights, the restitution, and the accounts, and the 100 wronged families, doing openly and as the Duke the work he had begun in secret. And every day he asked, humbly, through Mr. Call, who was beside himself trying to work out how to treat a duke who had mucked his stables, whether Miss Marrow would consent to speak with him. And every day, for a week, she said no. He bore it. He had no right to anything else, and he knew it. He did not have her dismissed for refusing him. He did the opposite. He informed a trembling Mr. Call that Miss Marrow's wages were to be trebled at the Duke's expense, that she was to have proper quarters, and proper food, and proper rest, and that if the Duke ever heard she had been worked like a drudge, or spoken to like furniture again, Mr. Call would answer for it. Not as a bribe to her, for she was not told the Duke had ordered it, but simply because it was just, and long overdue, and the least he could do for the woman he had wronged, whether or not she ever forgave him. He wanted nothing back for it. That was the whole point. He had spent his life giving nothing and trusting no one. He was learning, painfully, at 35, to give freely and expect nothing, which was the lesson a scullery maid had taught him with a piece of bread, and he was determined to learn it even if it cost him her. And it was that, in the end, not the power, not the restitution, not the trebled wages, that reached her. Because Prudence Marrow, nursing her broken heart in her new warm quarters, watched the Duke of Winterborn do all of it, and ask nothing, watched him set right the wrongs of his whole estate, and humble himself daily at a scullery door, and use his terrible power, only to protect and never once to compel her. And she began, slowly, against her own hurt, to understand something that changed everything. That the man who was doing these things was not a lie. That Alan Ward had not been an invention after all. That the kindness she had thought she gave to a stableman who did not exist had, in fact, been given to a real man. A hard, cold man learning to be otherwise. And that it had not been wasted, had not been laughed at, but had landed in the one heart in the north that most needed it, and had begun, visibly, to remake that heart entirely. On the 8th day, she sent word that she would see him. They met in the inn's small parlor, with the door open for propriety, and Mr. Call hovering in an agony of protocol, 3 rooms away. And for a moment, neither of them knew how to begin, because the last time they had spoken freely, one of them had been a stableman, and the other a scullery maid, and now one of them was a duke, and the other did not know what she was at all. He had dressed plainly, the plainest good clothes he owned, because he could not bear to sit before her glittering with the power that had frightened her. And when she came in, he stood, at once, the way a man stands for a lady, and he saw her mark it, and see what it meant, and not know what to do with it. "Sit, please," he said. "Prudence, Miss Marrow. I do not know which to call you either. I have been calling you Prudence in my heart for 3 weeks, and I have no right to, and I will call you whatever you wish. Sit. You need not fear me. I know that is a foolish thing to say. The whole North fears me. I have spent my life making sure of it. But I would rather cut off my hand than have you fear me. And I know that I have given you every reason to. And I have asked you here to try, if you will let me, to give you a few reasons not to. That is all. You may leave whenever you like. The door is open. Nothing in this room has any power over you, least of all me." Prudence sat, slowly, on the edge of a chair. "You trebled my wages," she said. "You gave orders about my quarters. You did not tell me. I found out from the chambermaid." Her chin came up. "Why? If not to buy me, why do it and not tell me? If not, because it was owed," Alaric said simply. "Not to make you think well of me. Because you had been worked like a beast and fed like one and called girl for 7 years in a house that stands on my land, and I signed my name to that the same way I signed my name to Simon Fell's ruin, by not looking, by not caring, by being too high and too cold to know. I set it right because it was wrong, Prudence, and I would have set it right for any drudge in any inn on my land once I finally saw it. And I did not tell you, because a kindness told is half a bribe, and I did not want to bribe you. I wanted only to stop being the kind of man on whose land a good woman could be ground to nothing, while he never troubled to look down. You taught me that. You, with a piece of bread. Do you remember what you said, that first night? You said you have to feed the ones in front of you, or you'd never feed anyone at all. I had spent 35 years doing the opposite, giving nothing, trusting no one, because someone might be unworthy. And a girl with a heel of bread shamed the whole of my philosophy in a single sentence. And I have not been the same man since, and I never will be again. And that is your doing, and it is the best thing that has ever happened to me." Prudence's eyes had filled, but she held herself hard. "You lied to me." "Yes, you let me love a man who wasn't real." "No," he leaned forward. "Prudence, that is the thing I most need you to believe, and the only thing I will argue with you, because it is the truth, and it matters more than my life. Alan Ward was not real. The name was a lie. The soldier's history was a lie. And I will be sorry for those lies until I die. But the man you talked to over the washing up was real. The man who took the heavy end of your loads was real. The man who listened to you, who thought your small, brave philosophy was the wisest thing he had heard in 35 years, who fell in love with you across a scullery and could not stop. That was not Alan Ward. That was me. That was Alaric Vane, with the rank and the money stripped off him for the first time in his life, which meant it was the truest I have ever been with anyone. You did not give your heart to a man who doesn't exist. You gave it to me, to the realest me there is, the one under all the cold and the power, the one no one has ever been allowed to see. You are the only person alive who has ever met that man. The rags were a lie. What was under them was the only truth I have, and it loves you. God help us both, Prudence. It loves you entirely. and it is not going back up to any castle without at least telling you so to your face." Prudence Marrow sat very still in the small parlor with the tears running down her face and looked at the Duke of Winterborn, the coldest, richest, most feared man in the north, who had come to her back door in rags and let her feed him and had gone away remade. And she felt the hard protective thing she had built around her broken heart begin, against all her sense, to give way. Because she knew, in the deep unteachable way that the kind always know the true from the false, that he was not lying now. The lie had been the coat. What sat before her, wretched and humble and hoping, was the man himself, and the man himself was telling her that her kindness had not been wasted or laughed at, but had reached the very heart it was needed in, and cracked it open like a seed. "I gave you my supper," she said, unsteadily, "because you were hungry and in front of me. That's all it was. I didn't do it to remake a duke. I didn't even know you were a person worth remaking. You were cold, and I had bread." "I know," Alaric said. "That is exactly why it worked. That is the whole miracle of you, Prudence. You did not do it for a reward, or a result, or because I was worth it. You did it because I was hungry and in front of you. There was no calculation in it anywhere. In my whole life I have never once been given anything that was not a calculation. Every gift, every smile, every offered hand has come with a price hidden inside it, because I am the Duke of Winterborn, and everyone wants something. And then a girl who owned nothing gave me the whole of what she had and wanted nothing, did not even want me to remember it, and it was the first free thing I had ever been given, and I think I loved you before I had swallowed the bread." He drew a breath. "I have not come to offer you a calculation either. I have thought a great deal about what to offer you, and I have decided the only honest thing is to offer you everything and ask for nothing, exactly as you offered me everything and asked for nothing, and to let you choose freely, because you are the freest soul I have ever met, and I will not cage you even in gratitude. So here it is. Prudence Marrow, I am asking you to be my wife, to be the Duchess of Winterborn, not because you saved me, though you did, and not because I owe you, though I do, but because I love you, the real you, and I have finally become, because of you, a man who might just possibly deserve to. If you say no, I will trouble you no more. I will see you safe and free and well for the rest of your life, and never once presume upon it. But I had to ask. A man who has been given the last piece of bread has to offer, in return, the whole of the loaf, or he has learned nothing at all." Prudence Marrow looked at the Duke of Winterborn kneeling, for he had gone down on one knee now, on the parlor floor, the way she had once knelt in nothing but the ordinary posture of her life. And she thought of the orphanage, and the cold, and the 7 years of being no one's, and the one small private wealth she had guarded through all of it, that she was a person who gave, and that giving had made her real. And she understood, looking at him, that she was being asked not to stop giving but to give on a scale she had never dreamed of, to take the one warm thing she had, her open, unguarded heart, and pour it not into a scullery, but into a whole cold estate that had never known warmth, into 10,000 acres of frightened people, into a hard, remade man who would spend the rest of his life being kind, because she had taught him how. It was not a rescue from her life. It was the largest possible use of exactly the thing her life had made her. And there is no woman alive with a heart like Prudence Marrow's who could refuse that, once she truly saw it. "The one thing that was mine," she whispered, "my kindness. You said I could still give it. You said it wasn't spoiled." "It is the least spoiled thing in England," said the Duke of Winterborn, "and I am asking you to give it the largest home it will ever have. Marry me, Prudence. Be kind, on 10,000 acres, for the rest of our lives, with me beside you learning it from you every day. I cannot think of a better use for the finest heart in the north." And Prudence Marrow began to smile through her tears, the smile of a woman who has just seen that the thing she feared was taken from her has instead been given back 1,000-fold. And she reached out and took the Duke of Winterborn's face in her two work-roughened hands, the same hands that had pressed a heel of bread into his on a freezing night, and she said the word that remade both their lives. Yes. They were married in the spring, in the little church at Winterborn village, And the Duke did a thing that scandalized the county and delighted everyone who had ever been poor. He opened the wedding to the whole estate, every tenant and laborer and scullery drudge, and fed them all, because his bride would have it no other way. "I will not be married over the heads of hungry people," Prudence had said. "If they cannot come, and if they cannot eat, then it is not a wedding I want. Feed the ones in front of us, Alaric, all of them. It's the only kind of grand I understand." And so the Duke of Winterborn, who had spent his life walled away from his own people, was married in the midst of them, and fed them all. And the North Country, which had feared the name of Winterborn for 3 generations, began that day to love it, because the new Duchess had been one of them, a parish orphan and a scullery maid, and had not forgotten it, and never would. She was the making of the estate, as everyone had known she would be from the moment the story got about. She knew, from the inside, every hardship her husband had never seen. She knew which cottages were cold, and which children were hungry, and which proud old men would sooner die than ask. And she reached them all, quietly, the way she had always done everything, feeding the ones in front of her, until there were no hungry ones left within a day's ride of Winterborn. And the Duke changed with her and because of her. The cold burned off him year by year in the warmth of a wife who had never in her life met a person she could not be kind to, until the hard, remote tyrant his father had made him was a thing the tenants could scarcely remember, replaced by a grave, generous, deeply loved man who was known to have gone once, in rags, among his own people, to learn what he had never troubled to know, and to have come back changed forever by a woman who gave him her supper. He kept the shawl. That was the thing Prudence found, years into their marriage, that undid her entirely. The thin, worn wool shawl she had wrapped around a beggar's neck on a January night, folded and kept in the drawer of his writing desk, where a lesser man might have kept his seal or his valuables. She found it by accident and stood holding it, and he came in and saw her face and knew. "I keep it to remember," he said quietly, "on the days when the old coldness tries to come back. And it does try, Prudence. It will try till I die. My father built it deep. On those days I take it out and I hold it, and I remember that the whole of my life, everything good in it, everything I am that is worth being, began because a girl who owned nothing looked at a starving stranger and gave him the only wealth she had. I keep it to remember that I was saved by a piece of bread and a shawl, and that the greatest power in the north was remade by the smallest kindness in it, and that I must never, ever again be too high or too cold to be reached by a hungry person at a back door. It is the most valuable thing I own. It cost you your supper, and it bought me my soul. I will keep it till I die." And Prudence Merrow, Duchess of Winterborn, who had once believed that her kindness was the only thing that was hers, and that a rich man had come and taken it, stood in the great house that her kindness had warmed, holding the shawl that had remade a duke, beside the man who had knelt in rags at her back door, and then knelt again, as himself, to ask for the whole of her, and understood at last that nothing had been taken from her at all. It had only been given back, multiplied past all counting, exactly as she had always half believed and never dared to prove, that kindness given freely is the one wealth that cannot be spent, only grown, and that the smallest piece of bread, given to the right hungry stranger on the right cold night, can turn out to be the seed of everything. "You were the hungriest man in the north," she told him, folding the shawl gently back into its drawer, "and you didn't even know it. You had 10,000 acres, and you were starving. I only ever fed you the once. You've been feeding on it ever since." "I have," said the Duke of Winterborn, and drew his wife into his arms in the warm, bright house that had been a fortress of cold before her. "And I always will. It was the best meal I ever had. It has lasted me a lifetime, and it is not finished yet."